Get started. Thank you all so much for being here, spending a bit of your day, whether it's morning or afternoon or evening. We have people from just about everywhere here. You are joining us for Neurodiversity in Tech. This is also part of General Assembly's Tech Week conference, so I'm sure we'll be seeing you at other events as well. And I'm gonna look to my panelists. Can everyone see my screen here? Awesome. I want to give a special thanks to all of our community partners for making this whole conference possible. I'm going to give a special shout out to Auticon. You will see on Mark's screen who is joining us as a community partner for this event and for the entire conference. A great organization which Mark will have the opportunity to talk more about throughout this hour. For those of you who are new to General Assembly, we are a pioneer in education and career transformation, specializing in today's most in-demand skills. As you can see on the screen, we primarily focus on these three verticals: coding, design, data, marketing, business, and career development. We have over 30 campuses around the world in 10 countries, with over 70,000 alumni of our part-time and full-time classes, and over 1 million alumni of our workshops and events, which you are all now part of that really large alumni group. And we are nothing without our expert instructors, which you're going to get to meet today. A couple of norms for today's meeting. One, we want this to be interactive. We have a pretty intimate setting with a lot of experts who are going to share their experiences and their knowledge with all of you today. Encourage you to use the Q&A for your questions and use the chat for your more general commentary. This event will be recorded and it will be transcribed and it will be sent out to everyone who signed up for today's event. And then lastly, encourage you to share your experience with us today on social media using the hashtag #HitPlay. And with that, I will turn things over to our fantastic moderator, Tim, who will kick things off by introducing and asking questions to our panelists. So take it away, Tim.
Well, hello. Thank you very much, Ben. And we just quickly introduce our panelists. We're going to have Hiren from EY, or used to be Ernst & Young. We have Marcelle, who's here from Ultranauts, then Mark Pfister, who's, of course, from Auticon, and then myself, who's here from Google. And if we could start out for the first question, and let's just go down the row in the same order, because I'm looking at the slides, so that's real easy for me. And if each of you could just do a real brief, what do you do in your role at that company? And what do you do in the role of neurodiversity, autism, and work for your company, if that is only a piece of your role? So let's start with Hiren.
Thanks so much, Tim. And first of all, I'm honored to be on a panel here with Tim, Mark, and Marcy. So thank you for having me today. My name is Hiren Shukla. As Tim said, I'm with EY based in Dallas, and very thankful to have electricity and water this week in 70 degrees as opposed to a week ago. But all that being said, my role at EY is to help enable and drive EY's innovation and automation efforts, specifically around the use of data and technology to solve complex problems. And Tim, this is where the intersection, the most amazing intersection with neurodiversity and the neurodivergent workforce came for me about 6 years ago, realizing that the only way you get innovation is by thinking differently, reimagining the future, and then being bold enough to try new and different things. And so my role is at UI is to help infuse different thoughts into our existing processes and teams so that we can better service our clients and build better solution. And so I am a champion around neurodiversity at UI.
Well, thank you. And I will certainly vouch for you being a champion, not just at EY, but globally being a champion. You've shown up at more places around the world speaking than I can shake a stick at. Now, we didn't say this in the beginning, but this is actually kind of a unique panel, because normally when we have these panels, it's mostly neurotypicals and maybe one or two autistic individuals. Well, this panel is actually backwards, and Hiren is actually the only neurotypical on the entire panel, and the rest of us are autistic. So you're really going to be hearing probably a different viewpoint than you might have heard in the past. So Marcy, tell us about you and why you use Samantha Kraft as your pen name and the name that more people know you by than your real name.
Sure. And can I ask for clarification on the second part that you asked for us to talk a little bit about neurodiversity? Is that something you want me to expand on now or very briefly?
Yeah, more here, just, in your role, if neurodiversity stuff isn't all of your role, just what do
Sure.
you do in the neurodiversity area? And then we'll dig in a little deeper for everybody about what it is.
I appreciate that. Well, I work for Ultranauts, Inc., and we're 100% remote. I've been with the company for 6 years. I served as their first recruiter, first community manager, first outreach specialist. I am now the senior manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion and ambassador. And what that means is I do calls with individuals who are on the spectrum or similar profile and their allies, like a lot of people that are on the call today, from around the world. I speak to people almost every day, either through text or in-person events such as this. At our company, we have 75% who identify with being on the autism spectrum. And I'm very proud to say for a quality engineering firm, we have 45% that are non-males. And we have people across the gender spectrum, the age spectrum, the socioeconomic spectrum, all different types of people that are brown and Black and all different shades. So I'm very proud to be working at Ultranauts and the diversity that we have there. I'm also a published author and a professional educator, a former school teacher. I'm going to be pursuing my doctorate in social justice as it relates to topics we're talking about this evening or afternoon, wherever you are at. And I also have my own company and provide international training and keynotes on the topic of neurodiversity and the lived life of an autistic individual. And all of my information that I share is gleaned from over 2,000 hours of study and research in my book, Autism, a Briefcase, to be booked soon, and over 10,000 interactions with people around the world who are autistic and their supporters.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. That very interesting, because I didn't really know all the story about your author side, other than that you had a pen name. So very
yes,
very
that's
nice
where the
to
Samantha Kraft came from. Thank you. I forgot to answer that part because it wasn't in my notes.
Very nice to know a lot more about it. Thank you very much. So next up, we have Mark Pfister from Auticon. Now, Mark and I know each other pretty darn well. And because of that, and because we're both autistic, I know both he and I can talk way too long. So I brought along my geek timer, and I'm going to push the button, Mark, and you have 2 minutes to respond with, tell us what you do and how it fits in with neurodiversity.
All right.
You're on.
So I'm the last and definitely least of us, as I've been working in neurodiversity for probably the least amount of time, as I didn't even know I was autistic until 2 years ago. And so there you have it. I've been working in this space for about 2 years. I work for Auticon, the company that has 100% of its consultants on the spectrum. We do whatever it is our clients want us to do, whether that's neurodiversity transformation or that's something technical. Of course, this is a neurodiversity and tech talk, so surely we need to talk about that a bit. And 31% of our back office folks, that is our non-front office consultants, are on the spectrum. How did I do?
There's 2 minutes on the button. You were pretty darn tight, I have to say. Thank you. And as far as myself, my name's Tim Goldstein, and I also was a late diagnosis. I was diagnosed about 6 years ago, so a little longer than Mark, but definitely very late in my life. And I do currently work at Google, just moved into the training department, but kind of funny, I never realized after all I've talked to Hiren that you came from the data background and arena, because that's where I've spent 20 years is in data. And there certainly is a lot of us autistic individuals, will say, in the data world. And before Google, I worked as an independent consultant, was in and out of huge amounts of companies doing that to see a lot of different ways people did things, and then had my own businesses and marketing and all that stuff. So I tend to put a little more marketing and business spin on my explanations. So with that introduction, I want to actually jump right into one of the things that a huge amount of people always want to know about, which is, what is neurodiversity? So I'm going to start with Marcy, just because what the heck, you're in the middle. So why not start in the middle?
And considering I've written hundreds of pages on this, I think you might want to take out that timer.
Okay, we'll start. Here we go.
And considering my unique brain variance compared to the typical population. So neurodiversity, I have some notes in front of me. It's easier for me sometimes to speak in a public format with notes. So forgive me for reading and not making the traditional eye contact. So neurodiversity was first coined by Australian sociologist Judy Singer, whom I've had the privilege to have conversations with. And it's also, she's credited with coining the word, but so is also Harvey Bloom, who popularized it in an Atlantic article. And my definition of neurodiversity, which is based on my readings and interactions in the autism community and so forth, is that the standard for neurodiversity is recognizing natural variations of human brains and minds as a valuable aspect of human diversity. So just as diversity equates to a cornucopia of differences, neurodiversity is specifically referring to differences in neurology, including the way we think, we process, behave, function, cope, and perceive. And then there's the neurodiversity paradigm as well, which promotes inclusions of all types of brains and minds to break down the barriers of social constraint. And it's important to remember neurodiversity includes everyone. So when we have a neurodiversity hiring initiative, we're really saying an everyone hiring initiative. So to be more specific, a neurodivergent hiring initiative would cover the people whose brains vary significantly from the general population. I always say that everyone fits under the umbrella of neurodiversity except for zombies and ghosts, and that ghosts is debatable, and that's a good visual for remembering what neurodiversity is. And if aliens ever come, I guess we'd have to debate on whether or not they fit our neurology close enough. So everyone is neurodiverse, and the grandfather of neurodiversity is biodiversity, which is a concept that implies treating the planet and all life forms with respect and care. So the concept of biodiversity transfers really well into neurodiversity, because when we take care of each other and we take care of those of us who don't present as typical, we're taking care of the human race and the planet as well. And there's lots more you can learn about the neurodiversity movement and the neurodiversity paradigm. So it's not an easy topic, but that's a basic introduction.
Well, thank you so much. I think you hit on one of the, to me, key points that a lot of people struggle with. And that key point is neurodiversity is everybody. I say it a little different. I don't use ghosts. I just say if you're alive, you're in neurodiversity. If you're dead, you can get out, but that's the only way out, is being dead. But I think that's so important, because I think there is too much common thought that when you say neurodiverse, you're talking about a specific group, not about, everybody. It's like you say, it's like biodiversity. You're not talking about one specific area, you're talking about the whole earth. So I think you really nailed it. That's the important point, is neurodiversity is everybody. There's typical and there's otherwise, but everybody's still in there. So that is wonderful. I think you did such a good job. There's really nobody's going to be able to add much to you. You nailed that one. Thank you. So I'm going to jump on to actually the next question here that I want to ask is, and let's send this one over to Mark and see what your thoughts are first, Mark. How can higher education institutes or boot camps do more to prepare their students to be successful in both the job search and in the job when they get it?
Right. Well, so we've had quite a few applicants from that world, and they've expressed difficulty in that space. So how can educational institutions and boot camps help folks who are a little divergent from the typical? Well, One thing is provide a very clear roadmap, speak simply. Flowery language, analogies, aphorisms, colloquialisms, similes, metaphors, any other non-direct, non-accurate language, just try not to use it. And so just being open, honest, and direct. In fact, I used to work at eBay where there was a rule amongst leadership that we always speak openly, honestly, and directly. And so with that said, one of the open, honest, and direct things is you may not find a job right away. And that probably dovetails into another topic that I'll leave for later. One of the challenges for neurodivergent folks is indeed getting that job in the first place and keeping it.
I think the second part is, at least for me, it was the challenge. The getting them was easy. It was the keeping them that was a little more difficult. Hiren, I know that you get a huge amount of candidates coming in just because of the length of your program and the high profile it has. What do you have to say as far as what do you think education institutes or boot camps and such could do to better prepare autistic individuals to enter into the workforce?
Yeah, Tim, thanks so much. At EY today, we have 150 individuals that have specifically come through our NCOE program. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals who are already neurodivergent within EY. So we need to acknowledge that there's probably already folks in our organizations, whether you know it or not, whether they've self-disclosed, are neurodivergent. I think what we're seeing from a future of workforce and the needs of a workforce is very much around data and technology and the ability to use tools and this continuous learn, apply cycle that we know is applicable to everyone. I think where boot camps come in is they provide very specific use cases, and the boot camps or academies that I've worked with, what they've been really good at is providing feedback. So it could be your job search may be a while. It could be, hey, you need to work on this. But at the end of the day, Tim, I think one key aspect that we know is neurodiversity, the overall meaning, has missed the neurodivergent perspective. And that is what at EY we're saying, if we can build in from an employer perspective, the psychological safety that allows an individual to be themselves. And I think this is where boot camps and academies actually apply to employers, where they say, you don't want these individuals, neurodivergent individuals, to mask or camouflage because you will lose the innovation capability. If you allow them to be themselves, you will get the full benefit. And by the way, so will that employee, and they will be retained and be happy and successful.
Amazing point that you made, that just bringing in talent that thinks differently doesn't accomplish anything if you don't allow them to do the things that'll make them think different. Let's bring in some geniuses that think different and then make them act like all of us. Yeah, definitely that doesn't make a lot of sense. And one other thing that you pointed out that to me has been a lacking in a lot of the Autism at Work programs is the fact that essentially we're invisible to most companies. As a autistic individual at Google, okay, I'm known just because I'm annoying enough everywhere that I'm known. But most autistic individuals at Google, they don't even recognize they employ autistic individuals. What's at Google's no different than what employees you have at EY, and you certainly know there's a bunch of them there that you didn't bring in through your program. So what would you recommend as companies? How do they handle that situation of great talent who's now getting frustrated that other people are being treated better that are in the exact same group they're in?
Yeah, I think that, as we've learned, by the way, and I've learned from the neurodivergent community, you've met one person on the spectrum. Well, you've met one person on the spectrum, right? And we realized not everybody needs a noise canceling headset. Maybe some do, but you got to give people the option. And I think a lot of organizations can probably learn from, first of all, creating that safe space, and B, listening to the quietest voices, because that voice will tell you exactly what they need. One of our team members needs 5 monitors. Now, normally we don't have individuals that have 5 different monitors, but this is the way that he's able to segment out all his different pieces, because that's how his mind is working. And traditionally, Tim, if somebody put in a request for 5 monitors, it would get shot down immediately. And I think now we're teaching organizations and our own to say, how do you ensure to get to the why and what that individual needs to be successful? So I think that is, instead of managing by the mass, it's really managing to the individual. And frankly, the results and benefits are exponential when you do that, as opposed to what most people may think, or organizations may think, well, oh, I'm just putting in extra work. You're actually not putting in extra work, but you're getting a lot more benefit out at the end of the day.
Very, very, very good point. How do you get the autistic individuals that haven't identified, but we can pretty well figure out they're probably spectrum leading, to participate and ask for those kinds of helps, even though they're relatively trying to stay hidden still? And it's kind of a catch-22. There's always been the catch-22 of, why should I tell the company I'm autistic? Because all that's going to do is put me under scrutiny, because there's no positive benefits to it. So I guess really, how are you overcoming that? Because you're very representative of large organizations that,
yeah,
it's inertia. There's just so much inertia in big organizations to get those changes through to people's heads.
Yeah, I'll mention slightly, and I'll give my fellow panelists a chance to jump in. But I think, like any individuals who are different, they are looking for explicit action and signs of commitment from organizations. And I think most of us can see through authenticity or smoke and mirrors. And I think it's, again, creating that space for voice and accommodations, as they say. What do you need to be successful? I think what we found from the team members at EY who are neurodivergent, who did not come through our program, who have now stepped forward to say, I now feel that it is safe and comfortable for me to raise my hand and self-disclose for what my needs are, instead of me struggling on my own with that. So I think there are explicit signs that are looked for, not just words on the wall by a CEO or others. I think it's the day in and day out efforts to recognize there's a lot to learn, and the neurodivergent voice will probably teach you more than anything you need to know. You need to ask them.
It sounds very much what you're describing is really the same approach that we use in diversity, which is create the safety zone. And once people feel safe, then they feel willing to step forward and start expressing who they are and what needs they may have. So I think we have a great model to follow. Just to me, we haven't quite connected diversity and neurodiversity as really being one and the same. Let's go on to, let's start with you, Mark, just because, what the heck. What do you think the largest hurdles are that adults have in getting a job, in overcoming that job barrier?
So for adults who are neurodivergent, the biggest barrier is called human bias. There's a study out there, and I'll put it into the chat later, that refers to 13 human biases, are the major ones that are operational, whether we know it or not. Okay, I'm going to wax technical here on you. We have hardware, we have software, and we have wetware. Well, wetware is flawed in certain ways. We all know that. It works great most of the time, but it has certain flaws. And human biases, you can Google list of human biases. Wow, there are so many. But I think those are one of the things. And essentially, There's a professor at Stanford, if I'm not mistaken, that talks about othering, putting the person in front of you, whether that's a candidate who is interviewing or whether that is a person within your four walls, putting that person in a category just called other. Somehow they're not a culture fit. And so that is the fundamental problem that we are talking about. How do you solve that problem? Well, reduction in human judgment needs to come with an increase in understanding, an increase in mindfulness, and an increase in patience. So I call that acronym JUMP. Making the jump to true leadership is that increase in judgment, the increase in understanding, increase in mindfulness, and increase in patience.
Wonderful. I love the acronym. You know, I kind of look at it the same way you do, but I simplify it a little bit. Because for me, you know, I need a simple model to work in my head. And the way I really look at it is, when you're going into most organizations, it's like going into a small indigenous tribe. And the tribe is trying to check you out to say, do you belong here or not? And they're not checking you out to say, you know, do you have the skills we need here? They're saying, do you fit in with us? And really, I think when you're saying all these biases, those are all going on in the tribe. You know, they don't look like us. They didn't come from us. I don't know their mother, their father, or their grandparents. So they can't be one of us. So I actually think it's an instinctual bias, to be honest with you. I think it's kind of built in. And you're right. We have to work hard to get that part of the human mind out of it because it is instinctual, and put that on the side. Marcy, what is some of the things that your company is doing to try and overcome the biases and barriers that Mark just talked about?
Sure. So to tail in that, a lot of unconscious and implicit bias still exists for people with disabilities. Research shows that most people, as they age, as they get older, have less awareness and less acceptance towards people with disabilities, especially those with hidden disabilities. So that's important to keep in mind. And only 3% of those surveyed who were white collar workers with disabilities said they would disclose. 3%. So it goes back again to that psychological safety and creating an environment where people feel included. Also, research shows that when autistics have disclosed a diagnosis, they regret it. So what we're doing at Ultranauts specifically to help with some of the bias and some of the misinformation, and if it's okay, because my mind works differently, if you could repeat the question for me one more time, that would be great. I do better when I can visually see it, but if I can hear it one more time, that would be helpful.
You think I actually did one that was written down? I was making them up.
Were you asking me about Ultranauts and
what is Ultranauts doing to try and overcome the biases and challenges, as Mark, kind of described what an autistic individual tends to face at most companies?
Sure. So most of the hurdles that autistic people face are what a lot of people in historically marginalized groups face throughout history. So we've taken a holistic approach. We call it universal design or universal workplace at Ultranauts, and outside Ultranauts in my talks and writings, I call it core inclusion. And what that means is we're using a scope of inclusion and belonging that is for everyone, for the whole neurodiversity umbrella. What we found is what works best for autistic individuals and those with similar profiles works best for the general population and human beings. So for example, some of the things that autistic people run up against are broken interviews filled with outdated practices, snap judgments based on first impression, the inability to have a platform to share unique skills and traits, false stereotypes about a collective people, thinking we don't have empathy, we can't have children, don't have relationships. Came across a site today shared by professionals in the field who head these organizations, And they said, how many of you want to join in with this group? And right there it listed on that page of that website how we don't have imagination. So trying to counter those stereotypes and teach some of these key thought leaders with great intention that if you're aligning with groups who don't understand the neurodiversity paradigm and the neurodiversity movement and are using a deficit lens and saying things about us that are not only not true, but they're ableism and they're hurtful and harmful, then that's not okay. You're not really aligning with the autistic person. So at Ultranauts, we take the autistic culture, the neurodiversity movement, the neurodiversity culture very seriously, and how we can change those stereotypes and how a person can bring their whole personhood to a job screening process. And very, very quickly, because I don't want to use up too much time, a couple things we're doing is we provide everyone the same screening process. We don't siphon autistic people out because it's what I call blended neurodivergency. Many autistic people have coexisting conditions that are mere millions and millions of people around the world, ADHDers, dyslexic, dyspraxics, PTSD, anxiety. So we're looking, how can we help everyone? And by helping the autistic person, we're helping everyone.
That's a great point. I've heard that from many of the studies done at, some of the larger, longer running, programs, that overall what they do to train the managers, make the managers better managers for everybody, which very much puts metrics around exactly what you're saying, that it's universal. It's not that autistic people need to know more detail. Everybody wants the detail. Just we're willing to ask because otherwise we know we can't do it. Another thing you brought up that I think is real important to just reiterate because it doesn't get mentioned enough is invisible disabilities. We talk about autism all the time, but we don't talk about the fact that it's an invisible disability and that whole category of invisible disabilities that you're right. Most people with invisible disabilities don't disclose them. There's no reason to, nothing positive generally. So I think that is a big area that disability movement in general needs to recognize is there's a huge number of people who do belong to the disability community due to ADA and, laws such as that, but we don't identify as being disabled. And all the cognitive ones, certainly, if you, had heart surgery and, had cardiac problems, you'd think of yourself as a cardiac patient, not as a, invisible disability. But
I usually say condition as well. So I usually say disability or condition. So that includes people who don't identify with having a hidden disability or disability, because I don't want to assume that anyone who has a distinct brain variance is disabled. Some of us are and some of us aren't. So thank you for clarifying that.
I think you're hitting it much better, right? I mean, somehow you have to let it be known that in this disability arena, which is where we need to get service just due to the way the laws are written, that there's a lot of us who don't think of ourselves as disabled. We're only there because that's where we're told we have to go to get the accommodation.
And that goes back to basic human rights and the underserved, underrepresented communities having a voice and being able to verbalize. Just offhand, I saw a panel last week, and I'm continually learning, but nonverbal autistic people, for the most part, prefer not using that language because they do have a voice and they are able to communicate their thoughts and processes just in a different way. So that's another area that needs to be looked at as well, is allowing opportunity for all types of people that are autistic, not just those that can sit here and verbalize in a traditional way like I am.
No, you're completely right. And I think we do, in autism, we often forget that there is a large portion of nonverbal. That doesn't mean that they're incapable. I mean, I know a couple PhDs that are nonverbal, but they're certainly plenty capable. And they do tend to have a different way to think because of different communication styles. So again, what can I say? You keep bringing up just amazing, amazing points. So thank you very much on that. I'm going to throw this one back over to Hiren and say, what if you could give advice to somebody, say, coming out of college, what should they go out and brush up on and get better at to be able to get into a job, whether it's through your program or whether it's through your regular standard hiring process? Are there some general recommendations you would give to a autistic individual coming fresh out of college?
Yeah, Tim, it's interesting. We're here talking about neurodiversity and tech, and I know there's been lots of discussion to say, well, tech is not the only area, right, that neurodivergent individuals, and I would 100% agree, right? Neurodivergent individuals can do anything at any level, in any rank. But what we're finding very interestingly is whether you are an HR specialist, finance individual, you're in procurement, supply chain, other than maybe the creative arts, which probably there's also a need to have a stronger handle on technology. The ability to manipulate data, to find meaning, to parse, to use tools that would allow you to add value to your role through the use of data and technology is pervasive across any role. So it isn't just the IT organization that needs individuals that understand data and technology, it's pervasive across all roles. So Tim, short answer would say data analytics, visualization, integration, anything along those lines are significantly helpful hard skills, regardless of what industry, sector, or function that you're looking for a job in.
If they could only improve in one or at most two softer skills, what would be the one or two most important soft skills that they could actually work on?
I think most of us probably, and I would include neurotypicals in this, listeners, and how do we clarify information. So I think that is something where using your voice to clarify, and I love the way Marcy helped to bring back and said, oh, can you repeat the question? And we encourage individuals, say, if you don't stop somebody from talking and say, I've lost you, you're using irony or sarcasm, and I don't understand. If you don't tell someone this, they'll just keep going. So I think one of the highest soft skills is A, listening, and B, using your voice to tell individuals how best you learn and understand.
Speaking up and telling people what you need. It's amazing how it works. How about Mark? What's your thought as far as, what both hard skill and soft skill, what would be the most valuable that you think somebody could learn to help them get a job in industry? And again, whether it, as Hiren hit, it's not just in the high-tech industry. Grocery stores need people with computers. Banking, I know my banking friends complain all the time. Nobody thinks of applying there for tech jobs. And they use more tech jobs probably than, a lot of other industries. So what would you suggest, no matter what industry they're heading towards?
Right. So autistic people are in every industry, as we mentioned before. One of the biggest sins of the psychology community is that it only expresses psychology in terms of abnormal psychology, in terms of weaknesses. It doesn't have any diagnosable strengths. So I want to touch on that very quickly. And so I would say on the strengths side, focus on whichever ones that you identify as being your core competency. So visual skills, if that is your core competency, focus on it. Attention to detail, creativity, integrity. Have you ever noticed that many autistic folks are perhaps honest to a fault? Expertise. Becoming that expert is something that many enjoy. Memory, especially visual memory. Observational skills, analytical skills, as Hiren was talking about. Deep focus, critical thinking, tenacity and resilience, and kindness. Okay, this is one that is often overlooked. Kindness. And so these are autistic strengths and strengths of many in the neurodivergent who would consider themselves neurodivergent. But the biggest weakness to focus on, I'm going to echo Hiren, it has to be listening. There is a method just super quick, and I'm not going to describe it. It's the HEAR method of listening. It's an algorithm, to get technical again. It's an algorithm for listening. It's halt one's own universe. In order to empathize, H-E-A-R, E is empathize, with the speaker, get into their universe, in other words, by empathize. It's a challenge. If you think of this as a challenge, then it'll work out for you. Anticipate learning something new, not anticipate what they're about to say. That's the A. And R is reflection. Reflective listening is what needs to be done. And of course, reflection also after the fact, because sometimes you may have said something that wasn't quite right. So circling back and apologizing, for example, would be the R in HEAR.
And that's for that's for everyone, right? Not just that's everybody, because there's a lot of people who aren't autistic that need to learn a lot of communication skills, and a lot of people who are autistic who are teachers and counselors and communication specialists.
Yeah, as you said, Marcy, universal design. I mean, 100%. Exactly. Everybody could benefit from it. Some people might have to have it to be performed. Other people would just perform better if they had it. But unfortunately, too many of the people that would perform better if they have it, we just say they can do it already, so we just don't teach them anymore. Exactly. Let's see, where did I want to go with this one? Yeah, one thing that I wanted to say is, to me, and I've talked to a fair number of college and job seekers, and what I found is in the younger generation, so we'll say under 35. So when I say younger generation, we're covering a number of generations, but people who grow up knowing they were autistic, I've seen a big challenge with them. How would you put it? Thinking the world owes them something, like a job, and some company that has a program should give them a job because they're autistic and they were 2E, twice exceptional for people that don't know 2E. And to me, the biggest thing that we could teach them would be, you start like probably most of us started our careers. We took whatever job we could get to get us something on our career, on our resume, and we worked our way up the ladder. I don't know how many people fresh out of college have asked me, how do I get into Google or Microsoft? And the answer is, I don't know. It took me 25 years to get there. I don't know how you get there immediately. But that expectation, they won't apply elsewhere because they're so focused on, I'm going to get into this because I'm unique and special. Yes, they are unique. Yes, they are special. Yes, they should have great self-esteem. But when it's to the point of, I won't take a job and I'll sit here unemployed instead of working at the hardware store helping with their computer system, to me, that's one of the challenges we've created, is an entitlement almost attitude. So that's my personal, kind of rant around that one is, you got to start where you got to start. And a lot of times it's not the highest line ones. Well, I think we've pretty well covered the panel portion and moving really into the QA portion. So let's try and address some of these questions. And my monitor's a little distance away, so bear with me as I struggle reading my monitor. The first one, and actually, Hiren, you could probably take a good boot at this one first. And what the person's saying is basically they're a UX writer, and they're wondering about any recommendations, books, or anything about how you create inclusive digital content, which is a great question because I was just having an interaction yesterday with a UX designer about standards for evaluating whether it's autistically friendly. And the answer is there are none. But what would you, do you have any recommendations, Hiren, of somebody who wanted to be better at communicating specifically to that audience in obviously a more technical role, where they can learn?
Tim, I'm going to defer to our resident author on the panel, Marcy.
Okay.
I think, Marcy, you may be much more qualified to talk about this than I am.
You'll need to repeat the question for me if you want me to answer.
Oh, no
please.
problem at all. Basically, in summary, it comes down to they're a UX designer, and they want to do more digital content work that is, inclusive to people who are and I use neurodistinct as the term personally, but who are neurodistinct. And as far as I know, there's no real guidelines. I mean, all the discussions I've had with UX designers, there's no guidelines of how to word things so people can understand it, how to ask the question so they can understand it. So what the person's trying to ask is a suggestion of any resources that would help them better understand how to create, what's appropriate ways to create the digital content so that we can get the actual real meaning and not be misled by, colloquialisms and all the kind of things that tend to throw us off.
I'm still not sure I'm quite understanding. I'll try to answer very briefly. I would say with any other thing, go to the resources, ask around in social media, your connections, who might have quality websites, quality information. My expertise is not technology and engineering and so forth, so I don't feel that I'm qualified to answer that.
Okay. How about Mark? Do you have a stab at it?
Unless you want to make it more general and not engineering related, such as someone said interviews and things like that.
Well, I think really what it comes down to is saying, what's the correct way, or what's a appropriate methods to communicate to an autistic individual, autistic audience, so that they really get the meaning that you're trying to put across, as opposed to, they only got half the meaning and, we took it literally, we missed parts of the other pieces and went charging in the wrong direction. So they're asking, where can they learn how to write so they can understand better? And they happen to be in a technical realm, but it really doesn't, that's kind of irrespective.
Are you asking how I can communicate better with autistic people in general?
Well, they want to know where they could learn. Is there a resource? I mean, you certainly pointed out a good one is ask everybody around you.
Yeah, well, I like to consider the autistic population an identity and a culture in itself. And so if you replace the autistic population with another underrepresented group, such as Indigenous peoples, Native Americans, and ask yourself the same question: how could I communicate well with the Native American culture? Well, based on research and fact, the Native American culture, in many instances, the nations do not prefer eye contact when they're communicating. You can learn things by going to the actual people. So if you were looking to learn more about how to communicate with Indigenous peoples, you would go to them. But what so often happens in the autism hiring world is they go to experts who aren't autistic and they ask them how to do something. And then what happens, a lot of times they come to people like me who are professional autistics as the middle person and say, can you help me with this? And so what needs to happen is you need to get rid of, well, actually they're serving as the middle person, get rid of the middle person and go directly to the people. Neuroclastic.com has 400 autistic writers. I know the founder, it's a not-for-profit. Go and read their stories. Go to Hackey's site, not-for-profit, differentbrains.org. I'm on the board of the Art of Autism, on the advisory board of Neuroclastic. Go to the Art of Autism and read stories from actual autistic people. Learn our language and learn our culture. It's not about creating a way to speak to us. It's about learning about us and recognizing that the way we are is natural to us. In fact, empirical research now shows that autistic people have no communication deficits amongst their own people. So come to us, and like you are now, and ask us. Unfortunately, I can't answer the specifics about engineering, or I would.
No, what you covered covers it perfectly well. So it really, while it was couched around engineering, it really was, they want the content to be easily consumed by, and you pointed out all the appropriate kind of things that exist at this point.
I wanted to commend the person for asking us.
That's a great question.
That person was doing what exactly I was advising, so I didn't want to push that aside. I wanted to acknowledge that that person was doing that, but unfortunately I couldn't answer him.
You know, it's not an unusual thing, and it has nothing to do with how smart the other person is, truthfully. I was actually just working yesterday with a professor at Cornell and Vanderbilt together on working on one of their survey instruments, because as you read through it, it had things such as broadly describe your job. Well, is broadly one line, or is broadly like 16 pages? I have no clue how big broadly is. So it's those little fine things that you're right. You've got to talk to somebody, because I don't know of any guide out there that is a guide to understanding, you know, neurodistinct.
Well, it's not just autistics. Again, dyslexics need a certain way of reading things, ADHDers. It's bringing in everybody and getting their input. Just having bullet points and things separated helps ADHDers and dyslexics, and it helps autistic people. So again, it's using that universal lens. Yep. And gathering as much as you can from all different areas, and then bringing it and blending it together.
Yes, I agree 100%. You're right on. It's all comes back to it's universal design. If you make it easy to understand for the person who has the biggest challenge, it's even easier for everybody else. So wonderful points. I think you answered that extremely well. There's one here that says, to Mark's point on the difficulty of neurodistinct or neurodivergent, as you prefer, obtaining employment, I'd be interested in your thoughts regarding employment coaches who work with the NDs, trying to find opportunities and the value that they bring or don't bring. So basically, to summarize the question would be, and I'm going to throw it out and let anybody answer that wants to take this one, because I don't know who would be the best. But to summarize the question is essentially, there's job coaches and such out there that say they specialize in autism. How much value do you see in them? Have they been helpful? Those kind of things. And whoever wants to answer, go for it.
Well, my personal and professional partner is a job coach. So. My partner is J. David Hall of neuroguides.org, a not-for-profit, and he job coaches autistic individuals, and he also contracts out to businesses and job coaches at Ultranauts. And what we're doing at Ultranauts is we're changing the paradigm, we're flipping it. So in a lot of agencies, you'll hear about how they have a job coach for autistic people. In our agency, we have an autistic job coach for everyone. And I, again, would like us to look at that approach. It's not about the autistic person and getting them a job coach. A lot of people could use help with job coaching and life skills. And he also comes in and does team forums for us twice a month, where we talk about the global health crisis and political unrest and some of the injustices in our society in America. And he, as a non-autistic professional, comes in and mediates and does those. To your point, job coaching for autistic people is okay if it's not segregating, and if the person is qualified and they understand the uniqueness of being neurodivergent. I would not recommend having a job coach someone who's autistic, who's not at least neurodivergent or autistic themselves. That's not okay. It's like putting someone from a different culture with another culture. And what ends up happening in more cases than not is the dominant group, the non-autistic, is trying to have the other person conform and to use their communication practices and to be part of the non-autistic culture. And what needs to happen is the flip side, is the dominant group needs to start looking at the way we communicate is not inferior, is not deficit, and learning some of the things we do, like the panelists mentioned today, being honest, having integrity, being kind. So I would recommend having autistic job coaches in the workplace to coach non-autistic managers.
You know, that's kind of funny that you suggest that. As part of the event that us autistics at Google put on, we also offered to anybody, I mean managers particularly, but anybody can come, office hours. And it's autistic individuals. We're not HR, we're not legal. We're just going to give you an autistic perspective on whatever you want to talk about, which essentially we're being the job coaches for them. You know, they don't have to hire them, we're just going to do it. So it's very funny that we actually both kind of have the same concept that, no, you need somebody there that can explain to the neurotypicals what's going on. Not just keep explaining to the neurodistinct and the autistic that, no, that's not the right way to do it. So you nailed that so well. Amazing how well we align on that one.
Can I answer
Sure.
one thing? I'll take 10 seconds
Sure.
instead of typing it out. Someone asked what a neurodivergent person is. That's a fantastic question. It's a person whose brain varies significantly from the average normal brain. So it's all based on social norms. And I like to say that the only perfect brain I know of is Einstein that's in a jar. There really isn't any that exists. And several leading experts have pointed to the fact that Einstein's probably autistic. So when we talk about deviating and varying from the perfect brain, autistic people, I think, might be. So it'd be nice if we could drop all of that. But that's what neurodivergent means, that you don't have a typical brain.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think you're right. That's a good point to make, because a lot of people start thinking that neurotypical means that the preferred or better or something because it's the majority. And I think you made it very clear. That doesn't mean they have the perfect brain. That just means there's more of them. That's all it means. And the perfect brain, who knows where that is? It probably, like you say, it's probably in the pickle jar and it's Einstein's, which is an interesting way to put it. Well, I think we're like right at the top of the hour, aren't we? I can't quite see my clock. Actually, I can see my phone now. Yes, we are. We're right at the end to wrap up now. So, I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank very much the panel for everything you brought. Just tremendous things that you shared about how companies can do things better, how we can use universal design, where we're not just trying to help autistics or neurodistinct, we're trying to help everybody do better. And I think that's probably one of the biggest, most important takeaways from the whole neurodiversity conversation is everybody does better when everybody can do whatever the thing is. If you enable, the person with the challenge, how many times have you, run into the wheelchair ramp without a wheelchair, but you use the wheelchair ramp because it was more convenient? I do it plenty. So I think that's the same thing. We need that thinking now to move over to neurodiversity of, no, it's not just for the wheelchair person. Look at the person, all these other people that will benefit. And as you very much pointed out, Marcy, it's universal design. Everybody, the neurotypicals benefit all the way around. So I think with that, we've hit the end of the hour, and I appreciate everybody coming and joining us. And we hope to see you at another time, another panel. Thank you very much.